Romantic movement, which rejected technology, which revered the Middle Ages, by the way. Don't forget that Sir Walter Scott was one of the voices of that anti-Enlightenment and that Romantic movement. Walter Scott's Ivanhoe and other such stories mystify and recreate the image of medievalism. And along with that came various forms of aesthetic vanguardism, which had a quasi-mystical character. The power of words, in a sense, to hypnotize, and even hypnotize people and even make history. And with it, a denial of any kind of progress whatever. Which is not to say that I'm going around saying that there always was progress. By far, I am not. And I don't want anyone to come around and say I'm a pro-progressive lefty. It has been a mixed situation. And the question is, when will society resolve the legacy of freedom such that it becomes the prevailing system, or the legacy of domination when it becomes the prevailing system, as it did, for example, for a while under Hitler in the Third Reich, or Stalin in Russia. Postmodernism tried to find its traditions in this quasi-ambivalent Romantic movement, largely mystical, anti-rational, anti-technological, anti-anything, and anti-history. Okay? And while it is possible in architecture and in city planning and in certain texts to decipher them in such a way that they seem to be part of the Romantic tradition going as far back as the French Revolution, as far back as Rousseau. Okay? The real postmodernist floodgates were opened up after 1968. And I'll tell you why, because I was in Paris at that time. The Stalinists proved to be total collaborators for all practical purposes of Charles de Gaulle. They were against the 68 uprising. I can go into great detail about that. It's a story that has yet to be fully told to people today, who are separated by it by a distance of the greater part of, 25 or 30 years practically. But what happened was that a lot of people who were Marxists of one sort or another, note well, were so shocked by the behavior of the communists and by the queasiness of the socialists and by the way in which the communist trade union, the CGT, the General Confederation of Labor, tried to keep the students separated from the workers and tried to control the workers and bring them back to work and turn it into a purely economic general strike, which the workers initially rejected. They refused the contract. That a lot of former Marxists, I think of people from the Socialism or Barbarism group in France, which had dissolved by that time but still had its people floating around like Baudrillard. Okay? I think of even Marxists like Foucault at one particular point in his life. I think of, who are my favorite? That Lyotard. Now, I'm identifying people particularly because they were associated with dissident Marxist groups who were so revolted by the behavior of the communists that they decided to go into total 180-degree reverse. It isn't that they became anti-communist. It's, in a sense, much more deep-seated. They denied the very existence of history. They denied that history had any meaning whatever, that you could sort out progressive from regressive or whatever you like, that even such words like that were arguable. They went ahead and they proceeded to deny rationality as such. Now, mind you, every one of them modifies these denials, okay? So that, as I told you, you can no more pick out the ultimate postmodern text any more than you can pick out the ultimate communist text. You can only talk of variations, each on the other. They denied, therefore, history. They denied rationality. They engaged in this. I don't even want to go into the whole question of deconstruction because it has a very sinister meaning in some respects that I don't care to get into. And they hypothesized spontaneity and came out completely against political activity. So they, in other words, for every yay that the communists said, they said an absolute nay. And even when the communists said something, at least if only because of tradition, that was true, you know, it came from a Marxist text, they said it was untrue. And thus, the result was that they continually dissolved history, the individual, the author, everything into what, in my opinion, is nihilism. Now, you can play games with that nihilism, as Foucault basically really did. Ultimately, Foucault, after going through at least 2 phases of his development, began to turn back to history again in his history of sexuality, which he left incomplete. Thus, at the same time, you've got others like Baudrillard who've gone back to bourgeois society completely and now say you can't change anything. And so, have a good time. A message, basically, that is hedonistic, whether psychologically, intellectually, or just sensuously. And then you've even got the situationists, who many people will hear about sooner or later, who, having come out with cries in '68 like workers' councils, and here you encounter, again, mere repetition of slogans that are now long dead. Because if there had been workers' councils, they would have been controlled by the communists. Anyone who doubts that for a moment would be kidding himself or herself. And if you had certain of their demands, forget it. Have now come out and said that the so-called spectacle, namely the fact that everything is turned into a spectacular, as it were, epiphenomenon of the commodity. You see, no longer a question of the fetishism of the commodity, becomes a fetishism of the spectacle, namely the shadow becomes embodied, so to speak, of the commodity and of consumption, of consumerism, have now declared that this society is totally hopeless. Not that this is hopeless and ready to be overthrown, but any effort to overthrow it is hopeless. It has now invaded every part of life. And this I wish to deny. I'm saying that it's undergoing that invasion. Whether it can finish that invasion, which I do not believe, or not, the point is one's very individual spirit depends upon resistance. Postmodernism undermines any premises for that resistance. And from my point of view, it is extremely reactionary and has to be, in my, again, unrelentingly challenged and opposed.
Why do you think that postmodernism has become so popular in the universities?
Exactly because I think there is a sense people are looking at this particular point for 2 things at least, and possibly for 3. One of them, of course, it offers great professional opportunities. Now that Derrida has been given an honorary PhD from Cambridge, I was there when the fight took place, by the way, it was hilarious. About, well, give or take 40% of the professors thought it was an insult to philosophy to give Derrida an honorary PhD, and they had a dividing line. Those who believed, who favored that honorary PhD walked on one side of the line, and the others walked on the other side. And Derrida, you know, like Cambridge, you know, is out to get students, get well-to-do students, bent before the wind and before the tide. Today, students find in postmodernism a curious mix. 1, it's professionally very rewarding. 2, even those who are not interested in the extent to which it is professionally rewarding, identified with anarchism and personalism. Inasmuch as every organization must produce a bureaucracy, according to many postmodernists, or at least those who were involved in '68, who did that 180-degree turn without critically modulating and modifying dialectically, rationally, why they should oppose the Stalinists in '68, just decided to take the opposite position. To every yay, there was a nay. So today, many people in the universities view in postmodernism several anarchic characteristics. One,